Picture this. It's your wedding night in medieval Europe. You've just married the love of your life. The ceremony was beautiful, the feast magnificent. But as you approach your bedchamber, a heavy knock echoes through the wooden door. Outside stands your feudal lord, claiming an ancient right that will shatter everything you thought you knew about your wedding night. Welcome to the most controversial privilege in medieval history. The dreaded Jus Primi Noctis, or as it's burned into historical memory, the Night of the First Lord. What you're about to discover will fundamentally change how you view medieval society. This isn't just about one barbaric custom mind. It's about power, control, and the dark underbelly of feudalism that historians have debated for centuries. But here's where it gets really twisted. Some scholars argue this practice never actually existed at all. So what's the truth? Was the Night of the First Lord real, or the greatest historical myth ever perpetuated? Before we dive into this rabbit hole of medieval horror, smash that subscribe button, because we're about to uncover secrets that most history classes won't dare touch. And trust me, by the end of this video, you'll have ammunition for the most disturbing dinner party conversation of your life. Transport yourself to 12th century Scotland. The air is thick with the smell of peat fires and unwashed bodies. Castle walls loom like giants against storm-darkened skies. This is a world where your birth determines your death, where nobles hold the power of life and death over their subjects, and where the concept of individual rights is as foreign as electricity. In this harsh landscape, feudalism reigns supreme. Every peasant, every serf, every craftsman exists at the mercy of their lord. They work his land, fight his wars, and pay his taxes. But according to some historical accounts, lords demanded something far more personal, something that violated the most sacred bond between husband and wife. The story goes like this. When a peasant couple planned to marry, they had to seek permission from their feudal lord, but permission came with a price. The lord could invoke Jus Primi Noctis, the right of the first night. This meant that before the husband could consummate his marriage, the lord would spend the wedding night with the bride. Imagine the psychological torment. You've saved for years to afford a wedding feast. You've fallen in love despite living in a world where love is a luxury few can afford. The priest has blessed your union before God and community, and then your lord arrives to claim what he considers his due. Contemporary accounts describe scenes that would make modern audiences recoil in horror. Lords arriving at humble cottages with armed guards, new brides torn from their husbands' arms, young men forced to stand helplessly as their wives were led away into the darkness. The year is 1314. A young Scottish farmer named Duncan has just married his beloved Moira. The wedding feast is winding down when heavy footsteps approach their door. Duncan MacLeod, booms a voice that chills the blood. By ancient right and feudal law, I claim the first night with your bride. Duncan's hands shake as he opens the door to find Lord Blackwood, flanked by two armed soldiers. Moira clutches her husband's arm, her wedding dress suddenly feeling like a burial shroud. Please, my lord, Duncan begs, dropping to his knees. We can pay gold instead. My family has savings. The law is the law. Blackwood interrupts, his eyes fixed on Moira. Would you defy centuries of tradition? Would you risk the wrath of your betters? But here's where our story takes a shocking turn. Modern historians are locked in fierce debate about whether scenes like this ever actually happened. The evidence is maddeningly contradictory. On one side, we have documented laws that seem to support the practice. The Digest of Laws from certain medieval regions specifically mentions the lord's right to the first night. Ancient legal texts describe compensation that could be paid to avoid this obligation, usually a hefty sum that most peasants couldn't afford. Chronicles from medieval Scotland and France contain references to this custom. The famous Scottish historian John of Fordun wrote about lords exercising this right. French legal documents mention droit du seigneur as an established practice in certain regions. But the opposing camp of historians presents equally compelling arguments. They point out that most references to Jus Primi Noctis come from much later sources, often written centuries after the supposed events. Many appear in satirical works or anti-clerical propaganda, suggesting they might be exaggerated or entirely fabricated. Here's what makes this mystery even more intriguing. The sources that do mention the Night of the First Lord often contradict each other dramatically. Some describe it as a widespread practice affecting every peasant marriage. Others suggest it was rare and largely symbolic, perhaps involving the lord simply spending time at the wedding feast rather than actually claiming intimate rights. Could it be that the entire concept was weaponized by later generations to demonize the medieval church and nobility? During the Enlightenment, writers like Voltaire used tales of jus primae noctis to attack feudalism and promote their vision of rational modern government. But if it was just propaganda, why do we find legal records discussing compensation for avoiding this obligation? Why do medieval marriage contracts sometimes specifically mention protection from the Lord's claims? Whether or not the practice was as widespread as legend suggests, its mere existence in legal codes reveals something horrifying about medieval power structures. The fact that such a law could be written down, debated, and potentially enforced shows us a world where human dignity was utterly subordinated to aristocratic privilege. Consider the psychological impact on medieval communities. Even if most lords never exercised this right, its legal existence would have cast a shadow over every wedding. Young couples would have lived in fear, wondering whether their lord might arrive to claim his due. The very possibility would have poisoned what should have been the happiest night of their lives. Contemporary historians have employed forensic techniques to investigate medieval documents. Carbon dating, handwriting analysis, and cross-referencing of sources have yielded surprising results. Some supposedly ancient laws mentioning jus primae noctis have been revealed as later forgeries. Others appear authentic, but may describe symbolic rather than literal practices. Archaeological evidence provides another piece of the puzzle. Excavations of medieval villages have uncovered marriage contracts and legal documents that sometimes reference lords' rights over their subjects' marriages. But the language is often ambiguous, leaving room for wildly different interpretations. What's particularly fascinating is how stories of the Night of the First Lord vary dramatically across different regions of medieval Europe. In Scotland, the practice is often described as brutal and widespread. French accounts tend to emphasize the legal and ceremonial aspects. German sources frequently mention compensation payments that could exempt couples from the obligation. This geographic variation might hold the key to understanding the truth. Perhaps jus primae noctis existed in some regions but not others. Maybe it evolved differently based on local customs and power structures. Or possibly, the regional differences reflect later myth-making rather than historical reality. Medieval Christianity adds another layer of complexity to this mystery. The Catholic Church officially condemned any practice that violated the sanctity of marriage. Papal decrees specifically forbade lords from interfering with their subjects' wedding nights. Yet some clerical sources describe the practice continuing despite official condemnation. This creates a paradox. How could a practice so clearly condemned by the Church persist in a deeply Christian society? Some historians suggest that secular and religious law often conflicted in medieval Europe, with nobles sometimes ignoring church teachings when they conflicted with traditional privileges. Follow the money, and the Night of the First Lord becomes even more mysterious. Medieval tax records show that lords often collected special payments from couples planning to marry. These fees were sometimes called avoidance payments, money paid to avoid the lord's intimate claims. But here's the twist. The amounts varied wildly and didn't seem to correlate with the couple's wealth or status. This suggests that the practice might have been more about symbolic submission and economic extraction than actual intimate rights. Perhaps lords used the threat of jus primae noctis as a taxation method, never intending to actually exercise the right. Before you breathe a sigh of relief that such barbarism is confined to the past, consider this. Similar practices have been documented in various societies throughout history. Colonial systems, slavery, and other forms of institutionalized oppression have included comparable violations of intimate autonomy. Even today, debates about consent, power, and exploitation echo the fundamental issues raised by jus primae noctis. The medieval Night of the First Lord forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about how power operates in human societies. So, what's the truth about the Night of the First Lord? After decades of scholarly investigation, the answer remains frustratingly elusive. The practice likely existed in some form, but probably not as the widespread systematic abuse depicted in popular culture. Most historians now believe that jus primae noctis was primarily a legal fiction, a theoretical right that lords held but rarely exercised. When it did occur, it may have been more symbolic than literal, involving ceremonial acknowledgement of the lord's authority rather than actual intimate violation. But the very existence of such laws, even if rarely enforced, reveals the profound power imbalances that defined medieval society. It shows us a world where the bodies and lives of common people were considered property of their social superiors. The Night of the First Lord remains one of history's most controversial and misunderstood practices. Whether reality or myth, it serves as a dark mirror reflecting the brutal power dynamics of medieval Europe. It reminds us how far human society has traveled in recognizing individual dignity and rights. But perhaps most importantly, it warns us to remain vigilant against any system that reduces human beings to property or treats intimate autonomy as a privilege to be granted by those in power. What do you think? Was just Prima Noctis a horrific reality or an exaggerated myth? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one and love debating history with you. If this deep dive into medieval darkness fascinated you, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Trust me, we're just getting started with history's darkest secrets. Next week, we're investigating another medieval horror, the practice of trial by ordeal, where suspected criminals were forced to carry red-hot iron or plunge their hands into boiling water to prove their innocence. You won't believe what the survival rates actually were. Until then, remember, history isn't just about dates and battles. It's about understanding the full complexity of human experience, even the parts that make us uncomfortable. Keep questioning, keep learning, and keep digging for the truth.